There were 176 combat engagements on the front line over the past day. The fiercest fighting is in the Pokrovsk direction. There, our defenders repelled 52 enemy assaults. This was reported by the General Staff. The Russians also advanced in the Oleksandrivka and Kostiantinivka directions. There they carried out 20 and 19 attacks respectively. In the Sloviansk direction, the enemy advanced 12 times over the past day. They tried to push forward in the areas of Serebryanka and towards Zvanivka. Fighting also took place in the Kharkiv, Sumy, and Kherson regions. We are joined by Vladislav Voloshin, Colonel and spokesperson for the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine. Mr. Vladislav, welcome.
Good morning, glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Mr. Vladislav, we've already mentioned the Kherson region, right? With your help, can we update the current situation, particularly in the Kherson region and overall, in the area of responsibility of the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine?
Let's start with the Kherson region. In this direction, which is the Pridniprovsky direction, the enemy carried out 3 assault actions over the past day. They tried to push our defenders out of the Antonivsky bridges, particularly the road bridge. In the morning, the enemy also carried out 1 assault. One assault group also tried to advance near the Antonivsky railway bridge. Regarding airstrikes over the past day, the enemy carried out an airstrike using 40 unguided aerial rockets on Odrodo-Kamyanka. This settlement is located on the right bank, a bit downstream from the destroyed Kakhovka Dam. In addition, the enemy was quite active yesterday in shelling Kherson itself with artillery. Unfortunately, there are casualties, there are wounded individuals, and considerable destruction about 40 different sites. These include residential buildings, private homes, apartment buildings, power lines, administrative buildings, and municipal buildings. As for the level of fire activity, for example, the fact that the enemy carried out about 400 strikes with kamikaze drones also indicates a rather high level of fire activity that the enemy is demonstrating specifically in this direction. Regarding other directions, these are the Zaporizhzhia directions: Orikhiv, Julipole, and Oleksandrivka. In total, we had 40 combat engagements in the south. 3 of them, as I mentioned, were already in the Pridniprovsk direction, 5 in the Orikhiv direction, 12 in the Julipole direction, and 20 in the Oleksandrivka direction. The enemy is most actively trying to operate in the Julipole direction near the settlement of Vesely. There it carried out 6 assault actions. In addition, in the Oleksandrivka direction near the settlement of Verbove, the enemy also conducted several assault actions. And in general, in the Oleksandrivka direction, the enemy is present along the entire line of contact. They tried to storm. It is also worth mentioning that the enemy continues its attempts to infiltrate deeper into our defenses. Therefore, over the past day, 7 such combat engagements were recorded, during which our defense forces conducted search and strike operations to detect and destroy the enemy. There were 7 such combat engagements. Well, the situation is quite difficult. As for artillery shelling in the south, we recorded more than 500 artillery attacks using 2,200 munitions. Just a week ago, we were talking about 350 to 400 shellings and 1,600 to 1,700 munitions. This indicates that the enemy's activity is increasing.
Mr. Vladislav, the Julipole sector is undoubtedly one of the hottest spots right now. Understanding the complexity of the situation unfolding there, once again, I'll ask the question. If yes, there will be a comment. If not, we'll understand. Is there a specific position from the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine regarding what is happening right now on the Julipole sector?
On the Julipole sector, the enemy is present. We have effectively managed to stop them and are currently taking additional actions to block and prevent their advance. However, they are not ceasing their activity and are persistently pushing toward the area of Varvarivka. This is a settlement that is located to the north of Julipole, along the logistical route that connects Pokrovsk in Dnipropetrovsk region and Julipole. In other words, the enemy is trying to cut off the logistical routes. And it was precisely in the direction of Varvarivka that several clashes occurred over the past day.
The terrain there is basically steppe and forest belts. So regarding these forest belts, right now fighting is taking place in them. Fierce battles are raging there because the enemy, I repeat, does not stop trying to encircle Julipole from the east and north and cut off the logistical routes. Our brave units are fiercely battling the enemy, and every inch of our land comes at a high price, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy. Over the past day, we destroyed more than 200 occupiers. We destroyed, for example, a multiple rocket launcher system, a Uragan, an armored vehicle, about, well, more than 12 to be exact, artillery systems. For example, near Vesele, the enemy tried to advance using motorcycles. We destroyed 10 motorcycles. In other words, the enemy doesn't count their losses. They keep trying to move forward.
Mr. Vladislav, very briefly, one more question. The concentration of equipment in the south, is it quite dense? Very briefly.
The enemy isn't using equipment as much as they're trying to operate in small groups and employ infiltration tactics. But there is equipment as well, and we are destroying it. Yesterday we destroyed tanks.
Yes, that's why I clarified. Mr. Vladislav, thank you very much for your explanations. Vladislav Voloshin, Colonel, spokesperson for the Defense Forces of Southern Ukraine. Let's move a bit further north. The Russian occupiers have missed their own deadlines for capturing Pokrovsk in Donetsk region and Kupiansk in Kharkiv region. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced this after a meeting with the heads of the defense sector. And regarding security, according to him, the meeting identified the key areas of work for the defense forces in the coming weeks, and they are preparing an updated action plan for the winter period. Let's listen.
We will continue to apply our long-range sanctions. The special services and above all the security service of Ukraine and the Ukrainian army have their respective tasks. We are preparing for coordination with key partners in diplomatic work, taking into account the nuances in the assessment of the situation. We are preparing measures that can ensure diplomatic activation. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. Zaidu.
We are now joined by Viktor Trihubov, head of the communications department of the Joint Forces Group. Mr. Viktor, welcome.
Thank you. Greetings to you. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. I suggest we talk about what's happening in the Kharkiv region in a broader sense. Moreover, let's take advantage of the fact that it's the end of the week so we can, in a way, sum up what has happened there. I suggest we take each direction separately and analyze it according to the criteria of initiative, advancement, tactics, and the range of weapons used. That's the approach I'd like to take. Please, Mr. Viktor, we have
the four most relevant directions. We actually have more areas of activity, but not just four. Let's probably start with the most talked about one. Let's begin with the Kupiansk direction. That's where Putin was claiming that everyone was surrounded, that he would show this to journalists, but he doesn't make those statements anymore because just as it wasn't true then, it's not true now. Moreover, on the contrary, the trend is that the Russians are gradually but steadily losing control over the city, specifically the areas where they were present, the northern districts. These are the northern districts where they entered, where they tried to gain a foothold, but as of now, there are fewer of them there due to effective countermeasures. And well, for now, we can't call this a victory. It's an ongoing process that's still underway. But what we can say for sure is that the announcements about the fall of Kupiansk were a bit premature, and the Russian promises were also a bit premature. Right now, the situation is frankly difficult. It's frankly difficult for both sides. It's important to understand that there is simply no effective logistics for the Russians in the city, and it's extremely complicated for the Ukrainians as well. This means that the units directly in the city, let's put it this way, are suffering from the inability to properly receive reinforcements, ammunition, or sometimes even food. Nevertheless, since the Ukrainians have better logistics set up, and also due to the fact that the Russians now simply have fewer resources there, both in quantity and quality, the situation is somewhat more difficult for them. So here we can say that although we can't talk about any concrete results yet because the process is still ongoing, we can talk about a certain change in dynamics and the fact that the Russians once again have failed in their promises, at least in this direction. Next is the Lyman direction, which is very active. It's active in the sense that the Russians are trying to break through there and establish new footholds. But the situation there, let's say, there aren't that many large settlements, and there are well-equipped and well-prepared Ukrainian units stationed there. At the moment, it's more of a back and forth of offensive and counter-offensive actions. If we take the Velikoburlutsky direction, which hasn't been talked about much until now, there are indeed certain problems there. There are some issues in that, unfortunately, if we look at the dynamics over the past week, the Russians have managed to partially push Ukrainian forces away from the immediate state border. It's not a particularly narrow or wide strip, but it's quite a long one, in which they are now trying to establish a zone of control. You can see this on maps, including those from various analysts, that the Russians have established the same thing in the Velikoburlutsky area, having pushed the border back a bit. This is extremely unpleasant, although it should be noted that their plans were clearly bigger. The plans were obviously either to advance on Veliki Burluk or, on the contrary, to join forces and move further towards Vovchansk. But all they managed to do was to push the line a little bit of direct contact. The problem in general near the borders of the regions, and this concerns our entire area of responsibility, especially the immediate proximity to the border, is the very active use of glide bombs by the Russians. They drop up to 10 of them a day, and on one direction it is especially prevalent. And this is really a problem because it's hard to respond in kind. And to counter this, considering that they launch them from their own territory, well, how can you? So yes, unfortunately, this is something that greatly enhances the Russians' capabilities. And finally, God in the Ovchansky direction there. Let's put it this way. It could have been better. Despite the fact that Russian forces there were held back after the dam collapsed, they are still trying to advance. They're trying to bypass the city from the west side, and that's extremely unpleasant. One must simply keep in mind that the city is destroyed. It's important to remember that the city held out well for over a year, if not 2 years. And now there isn't a single intact building left there. And if there isn't a single intact building left, it means that trying to establish and hold new positions there is a separate challenge with its own complications. So in fact, the city is in a state beyond recovery, and technically it's extremely difficult to defend a city in such a condition. That's why it's not easy there either. But we have to consider how long the city was held, calendar-wise, and how it was simply leveled. By those same FABs, Mr. Victor, a couple of clarifications. You mentioned that the enemy had bigger plans, particularly regarding the Velikobolutska sector. And let me recall the president's statement, who spoke about the concentration of enemy forces precisely in the Vovchansk sector. Please tell us, is there a further concentration of enemy forces if this is open information? Well, for the most part, we are seeing active replenishment. They can afford to do this. The state border is close, and logistical hubs like those in Valuiki are also nearby. Additionally, there are separate training camps located in the Luhansk region. That is, it's not that they're building up significantly, since there are other directions that are more of a priority for them, but they are constantly replenishing. And also, there is a certain clarification. From time to time, news comes in, not only, by the way, from Ukrainian sources, that the Russians in one area or another periodically resort to advancing through urban communications. And apparently, there are enough populated areas in the Kharkiv direction, and accordingly, enough communications. Is there any indication that the enemy is also trying to go underground in this way? This was relevant, very relevant in the Kupiansk direction. Right now, not so much, because everything there has been shot up, and what hasn't been shot up has been destroyed. In other directions, it's not very relevant, as the settlements there aren't very large. In the case of Vovchansk, there's a high degree of destruction. In the case of Lymansky, for example, or Velikobolutsk, what kind of communication between villages can we even talk about? Between small settlements that are basically hamlets with 2 cowsheds, so they're usually this is not observed. As for the logistical aspects, accordingly, the Kharkiv region is a border region, literally a border region, so it would be logical to say that the enemy has a relatively short logistics shoulder here. which means their supply lines are shorter and more efficient in this area. How extensively does he use this short logistic shoulder? To the maximum extent possible, actually. This is a problem. This is a problem of short-range logistics and the ability to effectively use their own aviation, including for FRB strikes. These are the features of a border region, a directly border region. And these are the additional conditions we have to put up with, the extra factors that create their own increased complexity here. In other regions, there are different factors that contribute to increased complexity. Here, these are ours. And Mr. Victor, before we finish, there is just one more thing I would like to ask you. Could we possibly take a moment to talk in a bit more detail about any specific enemy behavior that you may have observed in the different sectors? Well, to be honest, right now I wouldn't say so. At least if we're talking about our area of responsibility. And overall, the war has now shifted to infiltration by small groups, and the active use of UAVs is not without reason. It has shifted into this mode due to technological, let's say, changes in the way the war is being conducted. This is a forced measure because, yes, of course, everyone was used to something different. People were used to artillery, armored vehicles, and manned aviation playing a bigger role, among other things. But now the situation is such that there is a huge number of UAVs, and not just UAVs, but drones in general. And this has changed the entire face of the war and made it so that infantry groups, while not necessarily becoming more effective on their own, have become one of the few elements that remain less vulnerable to what is currently happening on the battlefield. That's why now the Russians are using them very actively, deploying them almost everywhere. And accordingly, we have used similar tactics. No, we definitely have some individual ideas, some unique concepts, including the effective use of ground drones, which, unlike the Russians, we can say we are doing right now. But this is still at the prototype stage, I would say. Although in some cases, these prototypes have performed well in certain areas. But for now, that's how it is. For about a year now, this has been a war of small groups. It's a war of small groups and very active use of UAVs. Mr. Victor, thank you very much for your explanations. By the way, we also cover the work of ground robotic systems separately. Viktor Tryhubov, head of communications for the Joint Forces Group,